Hi, everyone. Okay, so it is 5:30. I'm going to begin. Good evening. My name is Brianna Ripka. I am the Voter Services Coordinator for the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our 2024 Voter Education Series, Ballot Box Basics. For your awareness, this webinar is being recorded, and as an attendee at this webinar, your camera is turned off, so your face will not be included in the recording. Sorry about that. 1 second here. A reminder that closed captioning is available in the Zoom. To enable closed captioning on your screen, click Live Transcript in your Zoom taskbar. If you need more assistance with closed captioning, I am dropping a help document in the chat. If we could improve accessibility for you in any way, please let us know by just message us in the chat. We began our time together with a land acknowledgement. Colonial Pennsylvania boundaries were first drawn in 1681 over original nation's land. We in Pennsylvania acknowledge the land ownership of the original indigenous peoples, honoring the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the great nations of Pennsylvania: Erie, Iroquois, Muncie, Delaware, Shawnee, Ohio Valley, Susquehannock, and Lenape. We honor all original nations of the past and those among us today. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Our state offices oversees a grassroots network of 30 local leagues all across Pennsylvania. The league encourages informed and active involvement in government while working to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. To learn more about our work and to subscribe to our action alerts, please visit our website. I'm dropping a link in the chat now. And so I'm pleased to welcome you tonight to our Ballot Box Basics, Safety at the Polls. We design these webinars because we understand elections can be, we know that voting, government, and elections can be complicated. In these 2024, our monthly webinars will discuss important topics like registering to vote, mis and disinformation, safety at the polls, and much more. Whether you're a first-time voter or voted in every election you're eligible for, we think you'll definitely learn something new. And to watch previous webinars or to sign up for future events, I'll drop a link in the chat for that. Throughout tonight's presentation, you're welcome and encouraged to ask questions using the Q&A function of Zoom. We'll leave about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of the event, and you're welcome to also engage with fellow participants in the chat. But please note, we will only be answering questions from the Q&A tool. In addition to a recording, please also note that we will send a copy of the slides to all registrants. Tonight, we're thrilled to have Veronica Degraffenreid with us. Veronica is the Senior Manager of Strategic Partnerships for Elections and Government at the Brennan Center for Justice. Before joining the Brennan Center, Veronica made significant contributions as the Acting Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. She's also served as the Director of Election Operations for North Carolina State Board of Elections for 6 years. In that role, she led a team overseeing voter registration, voter processes, and election administration across the state. Veronica played a key role in modernizing North Carolina's voter registration system and creating the state's first voting system certification program. Earlier in her career, Veronica worked as a special litigation legal assistant with North Carolina Department of Justice, focusing on redistricting and election-related cases. We're also excited to highlight that Veronica recently received the Hall of Fame Award from the National Association of Election Officials, recognizing her lifetime commitment to ensuring free, fair, and safe elections. Please join me in welcoming Veronica. We're so happy to have you with us, and now I'll hand it over to you to start your presentation.
Hey, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you guys this evening, presenting on ballot box safety at the polls. Just give me a second and make sure. All right, can you see my presentation okay?
Looks great, Veronica.
All right, super fantastic. So again, thank you and good evening to everyone. Again, I'm really happy to join you guys this evening to talk about ballot box safety. And so tonight I'm going to be speaking on the protections for voters, right, as they go to the polls in just a few weeks. There are certainly many, many protections in place that protect the election process. But tonight I am going to mainly focus on in-person voting. So first, I think it's important to be aware that safety and security is foremost on the minds of your officials in Pennsylvania, certainly the governor's office and the Department of State, and several other state and federal officials, have been actively engaged in protecting elections infrastructure, and that includes the people who participate in elections, election officials, and certainly voters. And so they have set up an interagency work group that believe in fortifying election security, and they come together, and these are experts certainly from the Department of State, but also Homeland Security, the HEMA, information technology. There are state police, National Guard, even the Office of the State Inspector General and the Department of Military and Veteran Affairs. And again, this team of key agency, they collaborate on increasing security resources, training, support, communication, and preparation. And I can tell you that they have been meeting certainly for many, many months, and they will be increasing how often they meet, and they are absolutely focused on protecting Pennsylvania voters, election officials, and again, the infrastructure of elections. I also want to highlight the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. It's a group that I'm involved in, and it is a collaboration of local election officials and law enforcement whose goal is to ensure safe and secure elections. And I really also should have included, it's not just local election officials and law enforcement, but it's also state and also federal representatives. And as a matter of fact, there was a meeting of this committee today in the Washington, D.C. area. So these individuals are involved in ensuring that best practices with respect to protecting voters and protecting election officials all over the country. And one of the things that we have done is to create a law enforcement quick reference guide for all 50 states. And certainly there's one for Pennsylvania. This is important because law enforcement generally do not receive any type of training on the laws that are in place to protect elections. And so we've created this little pocket guide so they can be aware. Now, we in no way are looking for law enforcement to be at polling places. But what we are mindful of, especially in light of many activities that occurred back in 2020 and that have continued even up until this year, that there is a need sometimes to engage law enforcement with elections. And so even if, if anything were to happen, it is so important that law enforcement, that they are aware of what they can and what they can't do, and the best way to work with election officials to ensure voter safety. So I'll go back one slide and just indicate that on the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections website, if you want to see in depth what is in the Law Enforcement Quick Reference Guide, you can go to the website and find this resource. We try to provide the resource for law enforcement, and so we have shared this information with the Department of State. They are aware of it, and that any law enforcement entity that is interested in getting copies of the Quick Reference Guide so that they can better understand the laws and rules in place for protecting people throughout the elections process, certainly at the polls, but also at election offices and at the, if any of the counties will have satellite election offices, these guides can be made available to them if they are interested. So let's talk a little bit about voter safety. Voters in Pennsylvania, like all states, have the right to vote free from intimidation under both federal and state law. But with respect to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania law specifically prohibits the use of or using threatening or threats or force or violence to compel any person to vote or refrain from voting. To vote or refrain from voting for a particular candidate or question, or to register or refrain from registering to vote. And certainly interfering with the ability of any voter to vote in through duress or coercion, force or fraud, or blocking or attempting to block the entrance or exit of any polling place. So these are specific laws that are in place in Pennsylvania. And so again, it is so important as officials are meeting and again, engaging with law enforcement so that everyone can be aware. And so we want this information to be widely disseminated. We want voters, I know that you want voters to have just a safe and easy experience when they do present to polling places in Pennsylvania. Again, in just, well, we have some time, but it's approaching quickly. The Pennsylvania Department of State is also very specific about, what is included in intimidation. So misinformation, disinformation, malinformation are all components of perhaps the dissemination of false or misleading election information, including certainly information on voting eligibility, polling place procedures, polling place hours, or voting methods. The Department of State and the administration, they see MDM, again, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, all things that they are mindful of and that they want to ensure that are not happening. And so they encourage voters to be aware of what is factual and what's not factual. So it's so important, for instance, to get information from the Department of State's website or the website of the county election officials so that voters can be protected against MDM or misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. I've kind of explained it a little bit on this slide. Certainly false information that's spread, whether it's unintentional or intentionally spread, is certainly harmful and can be intimidating. And information like disinformation that's intentional, the intentional or deliberate spreading of false information is something that we're mindful of. And then malinformation. Sometimes we see that there may be items that are factual, but in fact they lack proper context, and that too may mislead and certainly could lead to some intimidation of our voters, and we don't want that to happen. So, I mean, that's a little bit, just generally. And in the next several moments, I'm going to talk about to make sure that safety at polls is not just physical safety, but also the safety of the voting process, the safety of voters' ability to be able to participate, again, without any type of intimidation. And sometimes that intimidation may come along in the form of unwarranted or voter challenges. Certainly, there may be a valid reason that is permissible by Pennsylvania law, but there must be a good faith basis for a voter challenge. And so it's important to be mindful of the guardrails that are in place for voter challenges. So again, although Pennsylvania permits any qualified voter, election official, overseer, or poll watcher to challenge another voter's eligibility, state law does provide some guardrails, and I want to speak a little bit about that. Again, challenges must be in good faith and may only be brought regarding a voter's identity or residency. In Pennsylvania, those are the only two reasons for an in-person voter challenge when someone presents at a polling location to vote. Thus, challenges based, for instance, on like race, national origin, appearance, surname, language, religion, or some other characteristic unrelated to the qualifications to vote are not permitted. Sorry. And challenges must be directed to the judge of elections, it is their job to determine if the challenge is based on actual evidence and if there is a good faith basis to believe the challenged person is not qualified to vote. And in determining the qualifications of voters, the judge of elections must be impartial, certainly, and must faithfully perform their duties as required by the oath that they take prior to an election. The judges of election are prohibited from allowing routine or frivolous challenges that are not supported by a stated good faith basis and evidence that a person is or may not be eligible, and a voter may not be refused a regular ballot unless the election officials of the precinct are satisfied that the challenger has properly proven the voter's ineligibility with sufficient evidence. So again, the focus is not just on certainly protecting the physical safety of voters. We are hopeful that everyone is going to behave as we get, approaching election day. But irrespective of physical safety, again, there is safety, right, and security in knowing that when voters present to vote, that there are regulations in place that they should be able to vote, unimpeded, based on an improper voter challenge. So, want to speak a little bit about poll workers and some of the rules and constraints preventing voter intimidation by poll workers. And again, we are hopeful and, that all of the poll workers in Pennsylvania certainly will be there to protect the process, to ensure people have the proper ballot and they are being checked in as efficiently as they possibly can. But just want to make sure in this webinar that we point out some rules and constraints that really do prevent even voter intimidation by poll workers. So in addition to federal protections against the intimidation of voters, it is a crime in Pennsylvania to prevent or attempt to prevent any election official from holding the election, to interfere with the execution of their duties, or use or threaten any violence against an election official. It is illegal for any person, including another election official, to refuse to permit any election official, clerk, or machine inspector to perform their duties or to threaten violence against these persons. And I'm going to go back a few slides because there's something that I want you to be aware of. And let's see if I put it on. Yep, it didn't put it up there. So sorry about that. But I wanted to highlight that the Brennan Center and All Voting is Local did publish a series of resource fact sheets that really list out some of these rules and constraints, and they are on Brennan's website. So I'm going to pause for just a second. If you have a telephone, you can take a screenshot, and I believe these slides also will be shared with you, and so you will have access again to this link so that you can see in more detail what these rules and constraints relate to. Now, with respect to poll workers, certainly they are elected in Pennsylvania according to the law, but it's important to note that they do answer only to state and county officials, and they are tasked with specific duties to create a clear chain of command structure. And again, they must follow applicable laws, and failure to do so may violate their oath of office that they all must take, and it may warrant removal or disqualification, and it may subject them to criminal liability. They may not intimidate or harass voters. They may not disrupt elections through information or otherwise attempt to influence voters. They may not prevent eligible voters from casting a ballot, and they may not tamper or otherwise interfere with voting equipment or materials. Again, poll workers, when they're doing their duties, they may have access certainly to ballots and the voting equipment, but there are measures in place that also prevent any tampering with those materials, and there absolutely is a system of checks and balances in place and chain of custody that again protect the process, and it protects voters by protecting their ballots and protecting the results. The Brennan Center and All Voting is Local in its resources also published a set of guides, and Pennsylvania is one of the states that we've published a guide for, and it also includes the rules and constraints for protecting voters from intimidation by poll watchers. So in addition to Pennsylvania's intimidation laws that, certainly we've detailed, there are limits on who may serve as a poll watcher and what they may and they may not do at polling places. Watchers must be a qualified registered voter of the county in which they are appointed to serve. Each candidate may appoint 2 poll watchers per electoral district or per precinct in which that candidate is on the ballot. And each political party that has nominated candidates on the ballot may appoint 3 poll watchers for each district in which those candidates will appear on the ballot. Watchers can keep a list of voters, and they can make good faith challenges against any voter's identity or residency. And when no voters are present at a polling place, watchers can also inspect the voting checklist and the list of voters maintained by the county board. However, they may only do so under the supervision of an election official, under supervision of a poll worker. Watchers may not engage in certain activities, including speaking directly to or threatening voters, asking voters for documentation, or blocking a polling place entrance. Watchers must show their certificate from the County Board of Elections stating their name and the name of the candidate or party they represent upon request. And judges of election must remove watchers who are engaging in these types of prohibited activities. So next, I'm going to turn to, and again, this information is on the website for Brennan, and all voting is local. I mentioned, again, state and local law enforcement. Although on-duty law enforcement officers are generally, they're actually prohibited, again, from being within 100 feet of a polling place. In many instances, they may be called upon by election officials or any 3 qualified voters of an election district to handle disturbances and maintain order. But again, it's important that they are aware of how to engage in these situations. So that's why we have published the Law Enforcement Quick Reference Guide, just so that they know the rules of engagement if something like this were to be, if they must be called to a polling place. Guns at polling places. Pennsylvania law prohibits carrying weapons, including guns, in a number of places that are commonly used as polling places. So not all polling places, but just those that are commonly used as a polling place, and drop box locations such as schools and courthouses. Even at locations where firearms are not expressly prohibited, firearm carry may constitute unlawful intimidation. Such conduct may consist of carrying a visible firearm near a polling location or at a drop box or vote counting site, displaying a concealed firearm during a discussion or argument with a voter or election worker, or approaching a voter or election worker while displaying a firearm. Again, we've been speaking about in-person voting, but just be aware also that their Pennsylvania law and federal law prohibits certainly some types of canvassing efforts that may be used to intimidate voters. So perhaps something that's being done to prevent the voter from going to a polling place. So just be mindful that any voter who receives a visit from a privately organized canvassing group does not have to answer any questions and should report any incidents of intimidation to their local officials. And additionally, it is a misdemeanor in Pennsylvania to impersonate a public official. So I went through a lot in just a few brief minutes. And at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you. And my contact information is on the slide, is on the screen.
Thank you so much, Veronica. That was really wonderful. Very informative. I always learn something new. I'll now open it up to questions. So audience members, feel free to continue asking questions using the Q&A function. It looks like we have a couple questions here. We could get started. From Eileen, she asks, what protections are in place at the polls to protect the poll workers? This will be a very challenging election, and the BOE should ensure that poll workers are physically safe and not subjected to any intimidation.
Right. So and I didn't mention, but Pennsylvania law also um, gives the responsibility of maintaining order at polling locations by constables. And so those constables, if a county uses them, they also should be mindful of, the protections and what the laws are in place. So it is so important that county officials working with perhaps their constables and also the poll workers who also have responsibility of ensuring order inside the polling location, that both of those entities are knowledgeable about what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. And if in the, event that it becomes necessary to involve law enforcement, once again, we think in this election that law enforcement needs to be aware of the rules of engagement. So it's really a partnership. And I think also I mentioned the interagency task force that's been set up by the executive branch. They are already planning for, if anything were to occur, and like working also with the county officials. So I'm talking a little bit around that subject. I think the best way to approach this is just to be prepared. Be prepared and to make sure that those partnerships are in place and that people know how to respond and when to respond and when to make sure and to ensure that any type of response is appropriate. There is a resource that the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections has placed on its website, and we have done webinars, or not just webinars, sorry, tabletop exercises all over the country, and have shared those best practices with the Pennsylvania officials about, what are the best ways to ensure safe and secure elections. There's a 5-step plan that we've shared about meeting with each other, planning, having an agreement about what the rules of engagement are, and really just being very responsive, that if something were to occur, that the appropriate officials could come in and, quickly take care of any issue and ensure that voters will continue to vote and that election officials will be able to do their jobs, and not be subjected to harassment and intimidation. So it's a partnership, it's not just the elections community, but it's also state partners and local partners working together.
Thank you, Veronica. And then there's a couple other questions I think you may have answered along with that. What about constables? And then if an individual becomes violent or threatens violence, who's responsible to intervene? If you wanted to add a little bit more to that, but.
Yeah, I mean, if someone is intimidating or threatening a voter and it is not something that the election official or the constable, and it's my understanding a constable, they're not law enforcement. And so they are, to me, it's almost like a bridge. I mean, a lot of what we share in terms of the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, best practice would be de-escalation tactics. And so if something cannot be de-escalated, like for instance, if someone is doing something that appears to be intimidating or threatening, asking them to stop, trying to engage the person to better understand what they're trying to accomplish. If they're there just to electioneer, making sure that they are outside the buffer zone, but just making sure that they're not doing it in a way that's threatening to voters or to the process. But if it does escalate to something that involves again, a criminal committing a crime, then law enforcement and we really hope that it's the election officials who call law enforcement in, and they will be, ready to do that if a situation like that does escalate to that level. But again, just making sure that when law enforcement eat for them as well, when they come in, just to understand how to de-escalate the situation or to remove the individual, or if necessary, to arrest them.
Thank you for that. And then another question, are police required to read the guidelines?
No, these are voluntary. These are, we saw a need that was out there, all over the country. Again, law enforcement, when they get training to be an officer, they don't get training in election law. And so this is just an opportunity for them to understand that there are certainly things that may be occurring within their jurisdiction that may violate either federal or state law. And so we want them to be mindful of that and to be prepared to take any necessary action, and to do so certainly working with election officials, and to understand that when people are voting on election day, it's certainly important that they can do so safely and securely, but they can continue to do so, and that voting would continue. So that's why it's important for if law enforcement has to be brought in, they can engage, they can diffuse the situation, and they can allow the voting process to continue.
Thanks so much. And another question from Rochelle. What type of evidence does a challenger need to present for it to be good faith challenge to voters' ID or residence?
That is such an excellent question, and it's one that I want to be very careful and perhaps not specifically answering that. But if someone has what they believe is, they believe someone is, not eligible, based on what the law requires, I mean, they must be in the best possible position to share that type of evidence. So I know that I am not giving a solid answer on that, but it is incumbent upon election officials to take in the evidence, like if it's brought to them, and they will also be advised that if a challenge were to occur, they should contact their county election office, and the county election office, I'm sure, would be engaged with the county solicitor to make sure that any type of challenge proceeding is properly conducted.
Thank you. And then it looks like our last question, if anyone else has any other questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom. Deborah asks, if someone from the task force is assigned to our polling place, will they introduce themselves on that day? And she noted that she is a municipal chair.
Right, so the task force, these are officials, state officials, some federal officials, like a liaison, right, that are working with the Department of State. These individuals would not be at polling locations, So what they're doing, they are providing the high level support and infrastructure, guidance that then comes down to the county officials, who are then preparing you for your service at polling officials. So if something, again, were to happen at a polling place, at an election district or precinct, however you refer to them, it would be important to share that information directly to your county officials. And then if they need help and assistance, then they would share that to the state, the Department of State, and then the Department of State, again, would be working with officials at the state level to help and assist. And I'll give you an example. let's say that there is something happening, and there's the need, like there's an accident, for instance, right? And it is near a state highway, so the Pennsylvania State Police may be needed, and perhaps some type of accident also is blocking direct access, or making it difficult to approach a polling site. Getting the state police, certainly they're going to be involved in the accident, but they also may need to be mindful that, want to make sure that they're taking care of the accident victims, but just being aware that the situation has a trickle-down effect on the ability to vote would be certainly important, so that they will definitely take care of their duties and responsibilities with respect to the accident, but they may also make some other type of accommodation, like if there's some way for people trying to perhaps exit off the highway and provide access to a road that would provide access to the polling location. Things like that would be the reason why the task force is important. Or if there's some type of protest, right? If there's a protest happening somewhere, it would not just be in the protests, or, if they're lawful, they may be fine. But if there's a protest happening and it, takes on a nature where it may also be intimidating, or it may in some way, again, impede the ability for people to access a polling site. That's why it's important for emergency services, not just the law enforcement, but even PEMA, to be aware. Again, safety at the polls, it's not just a bad actor or actors somehow being intimidating. I didn't speak a lot about this, but sometimes safety involves other types of incidents, or even natural disasters or fires or other type of emergencies, that engaging task force members, so that if they're responsible for their share of like ensuring that people can continue to vote, they will be able to do so. So I shouldn't put all of the emphasis on voter intimidation, but there certainly are things that, it happens at every election. There will be something that will happen, some emergency or some little blip, right, that may affect the ability for people to vote or participate. What's important is that there are people engaged with each other. They've been preparing for that, and so that they can quickly respond. So regardless of whether the response involves some type of act, some type of violent act, or some act of intimidation, or just some event that may occur naturally or unnaturally, that there are officials who understand the importance of an election, and the timing, the when polls must close and how long they must be open. They have to be mindful of that so they can respond accordingly.
Thank you so much for that, Veronica. And then I think there's an anonymous question. When is it recommended and appropriate to call? I think you gave some examples of that. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that question?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
It was anonymous that asked, when is it recommended and appropriate to call? I think you gave some examples of good instances of that. I was just asking, is there any more times that you feel like it would be appropriate to call those elected officials?
I mean, certainly if anyone sees, anything that they believe is threatening, harassing, intimidation, if you feel like something is not, like a voter is being prevented from voting in some way, absolutely check in with the local election official. Check in with them. If there's something that, you believe there's disorder happening, if there's a constable, just making the constable aware. The constable is working with the election officials, and together they will then determine the best course of action. So we want to be careful that voters or others or electioneers, for instance, are not just directly engaging. If we're talking about calling law enforcement, the recommendation is to really try to route that through the proper channels locally. But if something, of course, is happening and an immediate response, and you think that you have information that needs to be shared, certainly calling law enforcement would, in that case, be appropriate, right? So I don't want to be an alarmist. I think when you know. So if someone's life is being threatened, in some way, certainly calling law enforcement would immediately be appropriate. But if the behavior is, of a nature that maybe it's, bad behavior, but it is, threatening, or it's intimidating, I guess. It's just intimidating in a way, that's probably not a call to law enforcement. That's a conversation with the local election officials.
And just to be extra specific, when is it recommended to call the 1-877-VOTE-PA hotline?
Yeah, so if you can't get through to your local official, or maybe just if you don't have the number, using that type of number also is also important. Again, there are people engaged at the state level who they set up almost a again, not to be alarmist, like the war room, but it's it's election central at the state. I mean, they are having been the acting Secretary of State of Pennsylvania, and also a Department of State employee prior to becoming the acting secretary. I can tell you that there is a huge team of individuals who, again, they've been meeting, but the day before Election Day, on Election Day, and a few days after Election Day, they are centrally located together. There are different zones, if you will, and they are not only Department of State staff, but they are there in collaboration with people from the from PEMA, for instance, and the state police, and just other that interagency task force. They are all co-located together, or if they're not together, they have direct communication. They meet regularly during that time period, and they get debriefs on things that are happening. So when calls come in, the staff, the people taking those calls will route, depending on the situation, the call to the appropriate resource and get help either for the voter, for the polling officials, or for the county, with respect to who the call is coming into and what the appropriate response should be. So I think the proper message, which I hope I'm conveying, is that a lot of the preparation that goes into an election is just thinking through scenarios and situations, so that if they were to arise, you don't have to figure out, well, who do you call or what do you do? That there's just a ready response, and you can address the situation, try to triage it, and then, develop the appropriate solution to ensure that voting continues, and that you take whatever other necessary resolution that would be appropriate.
Thanks so much. Another question we have is, if there is a challenge, does the voter get to vote and is it held as a provisional ballot?
Yeah, if it's challenged and the judges of election believe that the challenge is sustained, the voter would be entitled to a provisional ballot. Absolutely.
Thank you. Question from John. What are the names of the entities that would give early voting monitor badges to identify them at polling places?
The poll watchers, the entities, so those I believe come from the county officials. So your local board.
Thank you. And there's another question. Is it better to, oops, sorry about that. Would you clarify with someone bringing a gun to the precinct on election day? PA is an open carry state, so are voters allowed to bring guns to the polls?
Yeah, like unless, again, certain facilities that, have a polling place like a school, right? You can't bring a gun there, but otherwise, if it's another type of location where firearms are not expressly prohibited, um, it would be important for that person with the gun to know, that you can't wave the gun around if it's just, on your side, you know, yes, absolutely. Pennsylvania law does not prohibit that. Um, it may, someone seeing, the firearm may feel that it is of its nature, threatening. Um, so what we would recommend that person, who wants to carry a firearm, just leave it in their car. But, the election officials can't tell them that and can't prohibit them from bringing their, for being able to have their firearm. But if they are using the firearm, in a threatening manner, then it could pose an issue or a problem.
Thank you for that. And then this looks like it's our last question. Is it better to call the county or state hotline versus election protection hotline in case of an emergency? Fire, gas leak, protest?
Well, if there's a fire or a gas leak, speaking with the local election officials absolutely would be best. But even if you call the state, the state would very quickly get that to the appropriate person, but like do everything you can to have something like a matter like that resolved. If it's something that involves like voter intimidation, or if you are concerned that maybe the local officials, for whatever reason, are not being helpful, or you just want to make sure that you shared it with them, but you also want to share it with the state and election protection, then by all means, that's fine as well. But I would say if it is an emergency situation, working with the local election officials would be absolutely important. Um, Having worked at the state, I would also say, sharing certain information with the state as well is also helpful. It's not, many times people will reach out, like whether it are advocacy groups or the media, they may sometimes reach out to the state and ask about a situation like, or will like let's say that an emergency has occurred and that we will get questions like, when I say we, when I was there, working in the state, will the polling hours be extended, like what's the process for that, because something has happened. And many times we are absolutely, or the state election officials are not even aware that something has happened. So getting those phone calls are helpful because it does add to, building that, that database of incidents. And so like local election officials, they may be busy managing that emergency. They will eventually contact state officials, but sometimes they have to handle the emergency first. And so, yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's just helpful that if you do see something happening, certainly sharing it with your local officials first. But if you also want to give a heads up to the state or even to, an entity like election protection, sometimes that's helpful too. So the more people, the more information that you can provide, everyone, the better opportunity everyone will have to ensure, free, fair, safe, and secure elections in Pennsylvania.
Great. Thank you so much, Veronica. That looks like that's all the questions. We really appreciate you joining us this evening, and thanks for the wonderful presentation. Thank you all. And to watch previous recordings of Ballot Box Basics or to sign up for future events, please visit the link in the chat. And everyone have a good evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.